and welcome back to Franklin Covey's On Leadership podcast series, now the world's largest weekly podcast dedicated to leadership. My name is Scott Miller, and I serve as your host and interviewer each week. I'm also the author of the recent release, Master Mentors, 30 Transformative Insights from Your Greatest Minds, where I drew from our first 30 or so guests and shared a different insight from each of them. And now I'm on to Volume 2, Master Mentors, 30 New Insights from 30 new guests, available now on Amazon and all major book retailers. On now to Master Mentors Volume 3. Today is the business titan, the intellectual, the #1 best-selling author, Ray Dalio, who has authored a new book called Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. He is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of the book Principles by the same name, about life and work. Ray, welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Such an honor, Ray. You've become a household name. Obviously, your reputation is primarily that in the financial business. You are the founder of the world's largest hedge fund. You are reported to have a net worth that exceeds the collective 3 ages of my youngest boys. I mention that not because that's relevant today, other than your prowess in understanding, geo-global political issues, understanding macro, microeconomic markets. And today we're going to talk a lot about what you see as the future of really what is the world order, and perhaps even the changing world order, which is the title of your masterpiece book that requires someone multiple weeks to read, because this is the kind of book where you read 2 or 3 pages, you sit down and you absorb it, you think about it. And so I'm excited to get in.
More important than the book is there's a video that I put out. It's a free YouTube video called The Changing World Order. It's an animated video, very entertaining. It was put out a month ago. It's got 12 million views, so it's hot. It is an easy, digestible summary of what I'm trying to get across, the message I'm trying to get across in that book or study that I did.
So now you tell me, I read your 528-page word book, but I could have watched the video. Thanks a lot, Ray.
But I could, yes, you could have watched the videos. Tell me what you think. I hope it wasn't too painful.
I think the book is a masterpiece. You've changed the way I parent, the way I think, the way I lead. Not to mention, you actually wrote your first book around principles. You actually illustrated and wrote a children's version. We have 3 copies of it, 1 for each of our 3 boys who are 8, 10, and 12. The children's book is a masterpiece. I want to get into your work, but Ray, why are you so passionate about youth education? Obviously, you're translating books and audios and things like that. What's the passion there?
I'm 72 years old. I'm at a phase in my life where the most important thing I could do is pass along whatever it is that I have that's of value. And I learned a long time ago, whether it's the young people or adults, I learned about writing down principles for dealing with each of the situations that I faced. Basically, what I would do is I'd encounter my realities and I would reflect, what does that tell me about how reality works? And what are the principles I should use for dealing with that reality? And I'd write it down. And I built a collection of those, and I want to pass it along because there are circumstances that people face that help. And I wish everybody did that. You have 30 great leaders that you just mentioned, that you've interviewed. Wouldn't it be great if they all just wrote down those principles? And that's basically what you're doing when you're passing along their key principles for the book that you've mentioned. So I want to pass that along because I'm at an age where that's the most important thing I could do.
I think that was your offer to be featured in Master Mentors Volume 3. Did I get that right on camera? Let's talk.
Again, free, clear, pass it along. It's my joy.
Thank you, Ray. Ray, you are the founder of Bridgewater Associates. It's the world's largest hedge fund. For those few people, including those who are watching and viewing this interview, deconstruct for us just what a hedge fund is and why should people care?
Well, it basically means that I'm a global macro investor. What that means is I invest in all the liquid markets in the world. And I can decide to do that as a bet on them going up or as short sales and bet on them going down. And that's what I've done for 47 years. And that's what Bridgewater does. So it has the freedom to invest anywhere in the world from a long or short basis, meaning betting that whether it'll go up or down.
Ray, for the next half an hour or so, we're going to talk a lot about financial issues, geopolitical issues, the future of the U.S. and the rise and fall of great powers like that of the Dutch and of the British and so on and so forth. I want to start with what I think is one of the premises of your book. I'm going to read a passage and have you maybe riff on it. You say, I believe that the reason people typically miss the big moments of evolution coming at them in life is because they experience only tiny pieces of what's happening. We are like ants preoccupied with our jobs of carrying crumbs and our very brief lifetimes instead of having a broader perspective of the big picture patterns and cycles, the important interrelated things driving them, where they are within the cycles, and what it's like to transpire, what's likely to transpire. It's a big, bold statement. It's so true. I've thought about it dozens of times since reading the book. Talk about the premise of the book and why it's so important to not just look at things that are happening in our life, but things that have happened over, really humankind.
As I was explaining, that basically many of the things that we're surprised about didn't happen in our lifetimes before. So I learned this. I'm a practical man who has to bet on what's going to happen. That's my job. That's what it has been for 47 years. And I learned many times that things that were happening to me happened prior to my lifetime, because there's an arc. How often does one get a pandemic? How often does one get many things, a war, a revolution, a civil war, or many, many things? The lifetime takes about 150 years, some of these cycles, the rise and decline of an empire. They take 150 years. So we're surprised when they come along. A depression. I learned that needs the pattern. And so what I did this time, there were three big things that are happening in our lifetimes that never happened before. And I needed to study them. And those three things are the creation of an enormous amount of debt and the printing of money to finance that debt. That's producing an inflation. That's producing all the consequences that we're seeing today. That's one. Related to that is internal conflict. We have large wealth gaps, large values gaps, and we can see that we're producing very large political gaps, such large political gaps that we may have irreconcilable differences. Those types of conflicts, those types of gaps of the left, of the right, that populism that's happening, didn't happen in our lifetimes before. You have to go back to prior periods to see that. And the third great thing, big thing that's happening is the changing world order in the form of the rise of a great power, a powerful China, that is a comparable power to the United States. I want to measure things through statistics, but a comparable size. And they are challenging a system. We are having that is the world order, we call it, that began in 1945 when the United States won the war and was the most powerful. These three things coming together, each one of them, the last time you have to look at them was in the 1930 to 45 period. That was the last time that any one of them happened like this. But when they all three happen together, that's important. So you're seeing conflicts, internal conflicts, conflicts over money, and conflicts internationally. And you're seeing the changes in relative power. And I needed to study that. So that's why I wanted to study the cycles starting 500 years ago. 500 years ago sounds like a long time, but in order to understand really what's happening this year, next year, and so on, I needed to understand those patterns. And that's what I'm passing along.
So let's go deeper into that, because by discipline, by curiosity, you become a historian. Your book is titled Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. I want to share a passage from your book again. You said, from examining all these cases across empires and across time, I saw that the great empires typically lasted roughly 250 years, give or take 150 years, with big economic, debt, and political cycles within them lasting between 50 and 100 years. One of the things I learned from your book was that if you look at the patterns, the Dutch, if you will, had a large run of perhaps 250 years, and there was the British, and now it's the Americans. And if my math is right, 2022 minus 1776 puts America at about 246 years. Now, I know I'm kind of simplifying a complex idea, but what do you see as the future of American power, economic might, democracy with the rise of China? We've read that one of China's interests is to prove that democracy is wrong and isn't the right form of government. You've been to China for dozens of times, nearly 40 years. You've studied all the dynasties there. Riff for as long as you'd like on where you see the future of American power sustaining or perhaps declining.
First of all, I want to say that while there are arcs in time and rises and declines and patterns, more important than that is seeing the cause-effect relationships of what causes an empire to rise and decline, and seeing that those factors can be measured. For example, education, level of education. Do you have a competitive advantage in education? And how broad it is. Whether you're spending more money than you're earning, like for countries, like for individuals, their income statements and their balance sheet show how financially healthy they are. You can see it in terms of military power. All of these things are measurable. And so the cycle also is a reflection of the health. So today we can measure, and it's shown in the book, for all the major countries, we have a health index, and you could see how strong are you educationally, how much internal conflict, how strong financially it is. So we have 18 measures of health, and those determine the future, like a human health. And so if they're improving, we're going to get stronger. And if we're not, and what it shows is weakening. This, I just want to pass it along. Financially weakening. The decline of infrastructure, for example. We're passing the next generation a lot of debt. The military, the relative military power is not what it was. So if you look at the United States at the end of World War II, that's always when a new order begins. There's a war. The winners of the war determine the new world order, how the system is going to work. And then, and because the United States then had 80% of the world's money, which then was gold, and it had accounted for half the world's GDP, and we had a monopoly on military power, nuclear, it set the rules, and it began the American world order. And that's why the United Nations is in New York. That's why the IMF and the World Bank are in Washington, D.C. Over that period of time, you can see an arc. And you can see it really, I won't tell the whole arc because that'll take too long, but you can see where we are in terms of the amount of debt creation and money and the amount of GDP growth and all of that. So we're seeing that, for example, China, since I started going to China in 1984, per capita income has increased by 26 times. The technology and the various measures, the military, all of the statistics has shown that China has become now a comparable power, and that the United States doesn't have the same uniqueness in any of those powers, in military power and economic power and so on. That's just a reality that we have to look at. So we see that emerging. No, my contact is not that they want to disprove our system. It's that they're very practical people, and they have achieved, a lot. And so they have a different system. And so they view that as a competition of systems. But because there's no world court and so on, these competitions can be tests of power. They're typically tests of power. And that's the issue. So the most important thing for any country is to be strong. That's it. If you're strong and you're well in all of those ways, you'll be fine. The concerns are in a number of these areas, in education, in cohesiveness. We are fighting with each other, in increasing extremes, politically extremes, but values. So there's a good chance in maybe the next presidential election or before that neither side accepts losing. And there's a question in terms of following the rules. This is now more of a power competition that exists, and you can see it all around. For example, just recently in Florida with Disney and the state and the governor, there is, it's more now an antagonism internally. You could see it with the Supreme Court decision. You can see that conflict. You could see it in the form of people moving from one place to another. And so it's that picture that is important to see and to pass along. And I'm a practical man. I have to be. It's my job. So I have to see things as accurately as I can and convey the pictures as accurately as I can so that I can, help people see that I will make my own good decisions. Those shifts are shown in many charts in the book, and or the video, the quick video, the animated video, you'll see the charts, and then to be aware of that, and then to be aware of how to deal with that. That's what I'm trying to pass along.
Again,
so,
just
yes,
now you tell me there's a video. Thanks, Ray. Ray, so many places I could go with that. First of all, everybody clearly watch the video. I'll be doing it after this interview today. And read Ray's book for kids. It's a great education for kids. I'm a great evangelist of your child's book. Ray, what's happening? What's the outcome of what's going to happen with the Russian war in Ukraine? We're not a political program. This is not a news program. It's a leadership podcast. Is there going to be a vacuum of leadership in the world? I mean, is China's watching the U.S. is watching China, India is involved or not involved? What do you think is going to be the outcome of when the dust settles, hopefully quickly, with the Russian war in Ukraine? How is that going to change the world order?
We don't have leadership anymore because leadership comes from somebody being in the position of having a dominant power and producing leadership. So your podcast is about leadership. And if we look at the world, there's not a dominant leader anymore. And so that produces greater conflict, greater challenging each other. And so that's the picture that you're seeing. Now you're seeing a challenge of greater powers. So there has not been an escalation in the war yet of Russia. But so right now there's a ground war, and we watch it on television every day, and we see the latest episodes. But if we step back from that and you look at the world as a whole, you see that reality in terms of not dominant leadership and challenging all around. So in the Ukraine and Russia, this is the first time we're having a conflict with a really major power. In other words, a military power that's comparable to the United States. Fortunately, as of yet, that conflict hasn't turned to a military conflict between the United States, NATO, and Russia, because then you're dealing with comparable powers in terms of military powers in various ways. Of course, nuclear is the obvious big concern and big comparable power, but there's also cyber. There's other forms of warfare. The reality is, maybe the unfortunate reality, is that since the last war, there's been a lot of developments of technologies of how to do each other harm, germ warfare, all sorts of things. So we're now having that kind of conflict. It's very difficult to imagine who the winner of this war is going to be and how it's going to transpire, because either Putin and Russia win or they lose. Let me define winning. Winning means that if he gets the control of the eastern part of the Ukraine, if Russia is not economically crippled, in other words, they receive an economic hit, but it's tolerable, if he remains in power, and if he remains on the world stage, such as go to the G20 meeting, he will have a win, and then there would be a loss. If he doesn't have those things, then he would have a loss, but he'll probably escalate. So this is no longer a conflict with a more minor power. In other words, the wars that we've had in the past were with Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on. This is a war of sorts, at the brink of a war, with a greater military power. So that's something that's serious. That's something that is a serious dilemma that we're going to learn a lot more about. And it's the nature of the beast right now. It's the nature of the world. So when you talk of leadership, you know what leadership is, right? Leadership means that somebody is in that power to lead. And right now, the world does not have that existing. So there'll be conflicts.
It's a sobering assessment. Thank you for your time. I'm mindful of how much time we have left, so I'm going to pivot. Ray, you're a legendary investor. Bridgewater, of course, has hundreds of billions of dollars under advisement. You yourself, I mentioned, and your family have earned lots of money justifiably. And your reputation is one, of course, as being maniacally practical, as you've said, and a focus on details. I'm sure focusing on details has been part of your ability to predict the future and to kind of know where the puck is going, so to speak. And however, you write in your book that to see the big picture, you actually can't focus on the details. To the extent I've got that right, talk about, from a leadership capability standpoint, how important is it to kind of, clutch and gas on the big picture and the details, because leaders can't leave the details unaddressed. Sometimes the devil is in the details. Talk about that balance between big picture thinking and also occasionally micromanagement on the details.
I'm lucky in being able to speak with the greatest leaders of countries, leaders of businesses, and so on. And I gave a personality profile test to many leaders. I gave it to Elon Musk, Bill Gates, the founder of Netflix, Reed Hastings, many people. And there are qualities that are unique to those. The personality profile test is also, by the way, free. It's called Principles U. And it'll tell you a lot about yourself. And if you read it about others, Principles U, go online, it's free, and it's powerful. Well, I gave that type of test to those people. And the one thing that was about them, that there were many, but one of the qualities was the capacity to both see the big picture and go down in detail. When in the early days, when Elon Musk first built the first Tesla, he let me drive his car, and I met him in SpaceX. So here it is, SpaceX. He's going to the moon. And that's his goal. I come in there. He lets me. He says, "Go drive my car," and he gives me the key, and he points out the details of how you push this button and the trunk opens and this and that. So the great leaders have a capacity to go full rage. They pay attention. They can go to the big picture, and then go down to the detail. And they can do that well. That's one of the great qualities. You need both.
Ray, our executive chairman, Bob Whitman, is authoring a book now for Simon & Schuster on behalf of Franklin Covey called The 8 Moments of Truth. And he's co-writing that book with Karen Dillon, who is the former editor of the Harvard Business Review and author of many best-selling books her own. And they're interviewing legendary leaders, people like yourself, business titans, to talk about what their moments of truth are. They're going to actually interview you in a couple of weeks for the book as well. As you think about your moments of truth in life, you've had and lost billions of dollars and recovered it again. Your family has suffered personal tragedies, unspeakable tragedies. You've seen it all. You've experienced, unfortunately, highs and lows. From that, what are some of your moments of truth? What are you crystal clear about in life?
Life comes at you and it gives you things. And then what I learned is pain plus reflection equals progress. So what I learned is that you're dealing with reality. And so when you have a painful experience, it tells you something about how reality works and also how you should deal with reality when the next one of those comes along. And so that's what I learned. So I could tell you, examples, maybe that would take too long, but yes, that's your reality. You'll encounter it. Don't wish life was different. Life is life. It is what it is. And how does it work? What are the cause-effect relationships? What's it telling you about how it works? And then what are your reflections about how you should deal with it well to get what you want? Those are practical principles. So yes, it's changed my attitude a lot about the good and the bad. I now look at like a learning opportunity. Whenever there's pain plus reflection equals progress, or even the highs. People learn more realistically from the painful experiences. Yeah. Those are the teachers. What would I do differently in the future? And so what I learned is, like, if I can reflect on a painful experience, like it's a puzzle, and I solve the puzzle, I will get a gem. And that gem will be a principle that I literally will write down. Those are what my books are about. They're literally the principles I learned for dealing with those circumstances. And that gem will help me. And I think that that's what life is like.
Ray, give us some practical leadership advice. Bridgewater did not become the world's largest hedge fund by accident. You are notorious, I think in a good way, for running a rigorous style of communication and question asking in your meetings. What leadership advice could you give someone who perhaps is managing a team for the first time? They're in their 20s or 30s and they have 2 or 3 employees, or perhaps they're running a multinational company, or everything in between. Give us 2 or 3 leadership tips that you think could build someone's legacy, build their personal career, their personal wealth, if they follow some of these principles.
Well, I want to say that in one sentence, the culture that I built is, here's the sentence. It's a long sentence. An idea meritocracy. And what I mean by that is the best ideas win out. An idea meritocracy in which the goals are meaningful work and meaningful relationships through radical truthfulness and radical transparency. What I mean is there's a great power to have meaningful work and meaningful relationships together. It's the reward and it makes it work well. Meaningful work means you're on a mission together to do great things, to win, to do great things. So you feel that. And the meaningful work gets excellent work done. And the meaningful relationships are like you're in it together and that you share each other's lives is very important. And to do that, with radical truthfulness and radical transparency. Radical truthfulness means that you can say honestly what you think with each other and work out that, not this political environment in which you don't say the things that you're thinking. In other words, there's so many environments are phony. People come in and they give each other a high five and whatever, and then they go and talk about each other behind each other's backs, and there's politics. That's unproductive. So by having that radical truthfulness and radical transparency, I made certain things like everything was taped for everybody to listen to, so that there wasn't behind the scenes stuff. So if you do those things, that you have the excellent work and the excellent relationships, you can have, I believe in tough love. Tough love means that you care about the other person and you're in it together, but it's like the Navy SEALs, maybe. Use that as an example. To be tough with each other, to be excellent together, to know that that the toughness comes with also the love, and that, and the love is that tough love makes you better. So I think every organization has a culture. You're going to have a culture, and your culture will define your organization. And you have to choose your culture. You have to choose it, and you have to be explicit. So it was very important to me to write down for everybody in my company. I started with two people. I got a 2-bedroom apartment. I started with a guy I played rugby with and somebody who helped us. And it then became a 1,500 person company, according to Forbes, the 5th most important private company in the United States. And that journey always meant that same culture. And I had to find a way to do it. And I found that by encountering my realities and showing my encounters with those realities and writing down my principles so that everybody in the company could understand that helped me. So those are the things I'd pass along. If you can have the meaningful work and meaningful relationships, you will be successful and you will have a rich life. Rich not just in money, but rich, more importantly, in the relationships that you have. You'll be successful in that. And if you do that in a way where, you can have that radical truthfulness and transparency, that tough love, it'll keep you excellent. It's the reason, I gave the example of the Navy SEALs, but that perpetual excellence, that's what lasts.
Who knew we would get a masterclass TED Talk on leadership from Ray? That was beautifully said. Ray, what are you encouraged about in the world of strife and conflict and potential nuclear war and economic meltdowns, and it seems like, instability? What are you hopeful for?
Well, we have now the world, the most resources that we've ever had, the greatest life expectancy that we've ever had, more output per capita than we have ever had, and we have a tremendous capacity to adapt and evolve. And so if we can step back and can reflect, and I think that we're in an era of inventiveness that can raise living standards if we don't fight with each other. If we can deal with that correctly and or be good with each other, the capacity for us to make a better future is greater than ever, particularly even as we have assistance in how we think, when we're even dealing with artificial intelligence and the changes. Look at how the pandemic brought about the vaccines so quickly. So I'm optimistic about man's capacity to adapt and evolve. And at the same time, I worry about the financial conditions and I worry about the conflict. So my hope and my optimism comes from reflecting. I have a principle related to this. If you worry, you don't have to worry. And if you don't worry, you need to worry. Because if you worry, then you will prevent the things you're worrying about. And if you don't worry, those things might happen. So at this point, my hope is that by passing along this picture, this accurate picture, I hope, it's measured, you judge it by watching the video. If you're passing along that picture, it will produce worry. But that's okay, because that will maybe produce a better future, because we have the capacity within us and the resources to make the future better.
Thank you, Ray. On a much lighter note, I can't help but wonder about that small metal bowl behind you. Is it like Qing Dynasty? Is it the Ming Dynasty? What's going on with those artifacts behind you back there? Can you see those?
This?
Yeah, there's behind that, there's a little bowl. There's a little bowl back there. Was that from Sotheby's? Tell us about that.
No. I don't even know what it is.
Was it 80 million, Ray?
No.
I'm kidding, sir.
This is...
Ray, tell us about the video again and what's next for you.
Well, I told you about the video enough times, probably.
What's the name? Remind us the name of the video.
The Changing World Order on YouTube.
Thank you. And what's next for you?
Well, I'm in a phase of my life. I'm 72 years old, and I'm at a phase in my life where what's next for me is to savor life, to pass along the things that have been valuable to me, and to savor the exciting things, but also savor particularly my family and my grandkids. I'm lucky to have grandkids. And then I, evolve toward the end of life.
Will we see some more books coming from you?
One more on economic and investment principles. But that won't happen probably for another year and a half, and then I'll be done.
Ray, our time is ending. Can you share with us finally, what do you think your legacy will be?
Well, I view the word legacy as the gift of passing to the next generation.
Yeah.
I'm hoping the most valuable things that I have to offer are these principles or this approach. In other words, you learn a skill. Better to teach a man how to fish than to give them a fish. So I hope I'll pass that along, and then it'll disappear. We all disappear like, footprints in the sand. It'll disappear. I hope I can pass that along. And then also passing along philanthropically. This is an important thing for me that I've been doing for a while, to pass along what I have financially. And that's what it is. When you leave, you leave and you don't take anything with you. And so that's what I hope that I'm passing along. Some abilities and some approach to life related to principles and the wealth that I've created.
Ray, a very generous investment of your time today. Arguably, this book could be required reading for every undergraduate student in America and the world. The book is Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order: Why Nations Succeed and Fail. Ray, thank you again for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And we will see you back here next week for another conversation on leadership.